At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I didn't say a word. I just smiled and walked in. The ballroom at the Westbrook Hotel was filled with laughter, champagne, and the kind of floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. Chandeliers sparkled like stars above us, and a string quartet played a soft version of "Can't Help Falling in Love." I had spent the entire morning preparing myself for this. At 68, I wasn't vain, but I wanted to look presentable, polished. I chose a lavender gown Robert always liked, styled my silver hair carefully, and wore the pearl earrings he gave me on our 40th anniversary. He'd been gone 3 years, but today, I imagined him standing beside me, telling me I looked radiant. "Mrs. Edwards," the young woman at the check-in table said with a big smile. "Here you go." She handed me the name tag with elegant calligraphy, and I read the words slowly. "The old lady who's paying for everything." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely, it had to be. My name is Alice Edwards. I'm Jennifer's grandmother. That should have been on the card. But instead, I stood there, stunned, trying to comprehend how anyone, my own family, thought this was okay. Behind me, more guests lined up. I didn't want to cause a scene. Not today, not at Jennifer's wedding. So I smiled, thanked the girl, and pinned the tag to my chest. I walked into the ballroom, each step a little heavier than the last. The lighting inside was soft and warm. Tables were draped in ivory linens. Crystal glasses shimmered beside gold-rimmed plates. At the far end, the bride and groom's table was perched on a small stage, like something out of a fairy tale. And me? I was seated at table 11, near the kitchen door. I took my seat quietly, adjusting the place card that simply said, "Grandma." At least they got that right. People around me laughed, toasted, danced. No one looked twice at my name tag, or maybe they did and quickly looked away. I wasn't sure which was worse. During cocktail hour, I overheard it. "She really paid for the whole thing?" a woman whispered behind me. "Pamela said she did," someone replied. "Apparently, she's like their personal ATM." The words made my stomach twist. My daughter-in-law Pamela, Jennifer's mother, had always been a little distant with me. Polite, yes, but always calculating, like she was performing kindness rather than feeling it. I looked down at the name tag again. It wasn't just a joke. It was a message. Then Richard, my son, called to me across the room. "Mom," he waved, "come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." I walked over, still clutching a champagne glass that had gone warm in my hand. I recognized Bill Anderson. He had been one of Robert's business partners back in the day. A kind man. "Mom, this is Bill and Martha Anderson," Richard said. Then, with a chuckle, "Mom's our walking bank account." Bill's smile faltered. Martha looked down at my tag. "Alice Edwards," I said firmly, extending my hand. "Robert's widow." Bill cleared his throat and shook my hand. "Of course, Robert spoke of you often. He was very proud of you." I smiled politely, but I wasn't really there anymore. Because at that moment, it clicked. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was orchestrated. The name tag, the table placement, the jokes, Pamela's smirk earlier when I walked in. And Richard, my only son, laughing along. When the Andersons moved on, I pulled Richard aside. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing to my chest. He rolled his eyes. "Oh Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deep pockets. Dad left you everything, remember?" "Yes," I said quietly. "He did." He laughed, completely missing the shift in my tone. "Lighten up. It's a party." Before I could respond, Pamela appeared, all smiles and elegance. "There you are, Alice," she said sweetly. "Has Richard been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who's responsible for this gorgeous wedding." She winked. Then walked away with him, leaving me standing there, the old lady with the checkbook. I excused myself and went to the restroom. Not to cry. Just to breathe. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look angry. Or hurt. She looked awake. For the first time in a long time, I saw clearly how they'd slowly started treating me like a resource instead of a person. How I'd paid for Jennifer's college, helped Richard and Pamela with their mortgage, bought Christmas gifts for their friends' kids, covered medical bills, always saying, yes, because that's what mothers do. But when did I stop being Alice and start being the old lady who's paying for everything? Just then, the door opened, and quickly shut again. A voice came from outside. Alice? A man's voice. Familiar. I opened the door. Martin? It was Robert's old attorney. He looked slightly uncomfortable, holding an envelope in one hand. I wasn't sure if I should give this to you, he said quietly. Robert asked me to wait. But after what I just saw, he glanced down at my name tag and his jaw tightened. He'd want you to have this. He handed me the envelope. What is it? A codicil, a special clause Robert added to his will shortly before he passed. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, in Robert's careful handwriting and legal phrasing, was a simple directive. Any descendant who publicly humiliates my wife, Alice Edwards, shall be disinherited from my estate. I stared at the page, the edges crinkling beneath my fingertips. Martin looked at me. He never wanted you to feel alone, or taken for granted. He hoped they'd love you for who you are, not for your bank account. I folded the document gently and placed it back in the envelope. Thank you, I said. Then I looked at myself in the mirror again. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't just see Robert's widow. I saw a woman who had forgotten her own worth. Until now. The rest of the reception carried on as though nothing had happened. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the band shifted from the soft string quartet to a lively jazz ensemble. Jennifer and her new husband spun on the dance floor, her white dress shimmering under the chandeliers. From the outside, it looked like the perfect wedding. Inside, at table 11, I sat quietly with that envelope resting in my purse. The name tag still pinned to my chest felt like it was burning through the fabric of my gown. I lifted a fork to my plate but couldn't bring myself to eat. My appetite was gone. Every bite of food tasted like ash when you realized you weren't family anymore, you were funding. Pamela floated across the ballroom like she owned it, always smiling, always whispering into Richard's ear, always making sure the photographers caught her at the right angle. My son, my only child, never once looked toward me after our little confrontation. That silence was worse than words. I had raised Richard with everything I had. Long nights sewing clothes so he could have new shirts for school. Early mornings working overtime shifts so his college would be paid for. Summers spent scraping pennies together so he could go on trips with his friends. Now, the only thing he saw when he looked at me was a balance sheet. A waiter stopped at my table. Would you like more champagne, ma'am? I nodded, and as he poured, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished silver tray he carried. I didn't see humiliation. I didn't even see grief. I saw clarity. Robert had always said I had a quiet strength. Alice, he used to tell me, you don't need to raise your voice. You just need to know when to stand up. Tonight, in this room full of lace, flowers, and shallow laughter, I knew exactly when that time would come. The band finished their set, and the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Please, it's time for the toasts. Applause rippled through the room. Glasses filled. People turned their chairs toward the stage. Jennifer's maid of honor went first. Her voice bright and emotional, recounting how Jennifer and Thomas had met in college. Then Richard stood, raising his glass high, speaking about family and love, about how proud Robert would have been to see this day. His voice cracked at just the right moment, and people dabbed their eyes. But when he looked at me, there was nothing, no warmth, no acknowledgement, just a flicker of annoyance, as though he was checking to see if I would embarrass him. And now, the MC said, we'd like to invite Alice Edwards, grandmother of the bride, to say a few words. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze. I could almost hear Pamela's thoughts from across the room. Keep it short. Be polite. Don't make this about you. I smiled gently and walked toward the stage. My shoes clicked against the polished marble floor, echoing louder than the applause. When I reached the microphone, I didn't lift my glass right away. Instead, I reached into my purse and drew out the envelope Martin had given me. I was given something tonight. I began, my voice steady but quiet enough that people leaned in to hear. Something from Robert, my late husband. Some of you remember him as a business partner. Some as a friend. But for me, he was my protector, my anchor, my greatest ally. I held up the envelope. He left me a message, written years before this day. And I think it's time everyone heard it. The ballroom grew still. Even the clinking glasses stopped. Pamela shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Richard's face went pale. Jennifer froze mid-smile, her champagne glass trembling. I opened the codicil and began to read. In the event that my wife, Alice Edwards, is publicly humiliated or demeaned by any descendant of mine, those responsible shall be disinherited from my estate. Gasps filled the room. I lowered the paper slowly, letting the words sink into every corner of that ballroom. I never imagined, I continued softly, that I would ever need to read these words out loud. Robert hoped his family would love me because they wanted to, not because they feared losing an inheritance. I glanced down at my name tag. My hand brushed over the words written there. The old lady who's paying for everything. Yet here we are. The silence was sharp. Richard tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Mom, this isn't the time. Pamela reached for his arm, whispering urgently, sit down. Jennifer's mascara streaked as tears welled in her eyes. The groom looked frozen in place, unsure whether to comfort his bride or stay seated. Martin, the lawyer, had quietly stepped closer to the stage. His presence was a silent confirmation. This wedding is beautiful, I said finally, and I wish Jennifer and Thomas every happiness in the world. But I will not stand quietly while my role in this family is reduced to a punchline. I set the envelope on the podium, leaving it in plain sight. Robert wanted to protect me. Tonight, he has. I lifted my glass at last, my voice unwavering. To love, I said, the kind that lasts longer than money, longer than jokes, longer than even life itself. May Jennifer and Thomas find that kind of love, the kind Robert gave me. And with that, I stepped down. The applause was scattered, hesitant. No one knew what to do. But I did. I walked back to table 11, sat down, and placed the name tag beside my untouched plate. Not with shame, but with power. That night, as the music resumed and the party limped along, I sat quietly, sipping champagne. People avoided my table, some whispered, some stared. Pamela looked as if she had swallowed something sour. Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. But Martin caught my gaze once. He nodded. And for the first time since Robert died, I felt like I wasn't alone. Because love doesn't vanish with death. Sometimes, it waits in an envelope, written in ink, waiting for the right moment to speak louder than anyone in the room. The music started again, but it felt wrong. The band played the same cheerful songs. Yet the air in the ballroom was heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath. People raised glasses and forced smiles. But the laughter no longer rang true. I sat at table 11, hands folded neatly in my lap. My name tag lay flat beside my plate, its edges curling slightly from where I had pinned and unpinned it. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like evidence. Across the room, Pamela was whispering furiously to Richard. His jaw was tight, his eyes flicking toward me and away again. Jennifer dabbed at her cheeks, her new husband awkwardly patting her hand as though afraid to break her. No one came near me. Not one relative, not one friend of the family. I was an island, surrounded by a sea of people who had once called me Mom, Grandma, Alice. Tonight, I was simply the woman who had broken the spell of their perfect little show. As the evening dragged on, My mind wandered. Not to the music, not to the flowers, not even to the whispers. I thought about Robert. How many times had he leaned across the kitchen table to reassure me when bills piled up? How many times had he whispered in the middle of the night, "I'll take care of you, Alice," always. And he had, even in death. But Robert hadn't seen what was happening after he was gone. He hadn't seen how quickly Richard let Pamela steer the ship of this family. He hadn't seen the slow erosion of my place at the table. At first, it had been small. A holiday dinner moved to Pamela's parents' house. A birthday where my invitation got lost. A grandchild's recital I only found out about afterward, when Pamela posted a photo online. Each time, Richard had an excuse. Each time, Pamela smiled sweetly and said it was just a mix-up. And each time, I believed them. Because I wanted to. I remember the first time Robert and I wrote a check for Richard and Pamela. It was for their down payment on their first house. Richard had been nervous asking, but I could see the relief in his face when Robert said yes. It's what parents do, Robert told me later. We help them build a future. Then came the medical bills when Pamela had her surgery. Then the tuition for Jennifer's private school. Then the wedding, the biggest expense of all. I paid each bill quietly, never once asking when I would be repaid, never once suggesting they find another way. Because that's what love looks like, isn't it? Giving until it hurts, because you can't imagine saying no. But tonight, staring at that name tag, I realized love had been twisted into something else. Not gratitude, not respect. Expectation. A group of young guests passed my table, laughing too loudly. One of them glanced at the tag lying there, then quickly looked away, nudging his friend. They thought I didn't notice. I did. I noticed everything tonight. The way Pamela kept glancing at the envelope on the podium as if it might burst into flames. The way Richard avoided me. The same son who used to run into my arms after nightmares. The way Jennifer's shoulders shook. Her white dress trembling like paper in the wind. I wasn't angry, not even sad. I was awake. Awake to the truth that I had spent years pretending not to see. When the father-daughter dance began, Richard led Jennifer onto the floor. The spotlight shone on them. And for a moment, it almost looked real, a proud father, a joyful bride. But I could see the tension in Jennifer's eyes. The knowledge of what had just been read aloud hung over her like a shadow. I remembered when she was little, maybe 8 years old, and she used to spend summers at my house. We baked cookies together. She painted my nails with glitter polish. She curled up on the couch beside me while Robert read her bedtime stories. Back then, she saw me as more than a wallet. She saw me as home. Somewhere along the way, Pamela had rewritten that story. I left the ballroom quietly. Not to flee, not to hide, but to breathe. The hallway outside was silent, lined with framed photographs of other weddings that had taken place at the hotel. Smiling brides, proud grooms, families huddled together in joy. I wondered how many of those photos hid stories like mine. Stories where behind every glittering surface, someone sat alone, discarded, taken for granted. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. And in that moment, I realized something important. I had been complicit. By saying yes to every request. By covering every expense. By smiling through every slight. I had trained them to see me not as Alice. Not as mother, not as grandmother, but as the old lady who would always write the check. The door opened behind me. Martin stepped out, his expression soft. You okay? I smiled faintly, better than I've been in years. He nodded, as though he understood. You know, he said gently, Robert once told me he didn't worry about leaving you money. He worried about leaving you alone. That's why he wrote that clause. Not to punish them, but to protect you. I swallowed hard. He always did know me better than I knew myself. Martin hesitated, then added, Alice, you don't have to stay here tonight. You've already said what needed to be said. You could leave, with your head high. I thought about it, I really did. But then I shook my head. No, I said quietly, not yet. Because walking away too soon would make it seem like I was defeated. And I wasn't. Not anymore. I returned to the ballroom just as the music swelled again. Guests laughed, clinking glasses as though nothing had changed. But everything had. For them. For me. For all of us. I sat back at table 11, folded my hands, and waited. Because the cost of love isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in respect. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't paying that bill anymore. I sat in that chair at table 11, the noise of the wedding buzzing around me like static. Laughter, clinking forks, the shuffle of waiters carrying trays, it all blurred together. What was sharp, though, was the steady throb in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like recognition. Recognition of how long this had been happening. That night was not the first insult. Not the first time I'd been treated as less than family. It was just the first time the truth had been written so boldly, printed in ink on a name tag. Pinned to my chest like a cruel joke. And once the truth revealed itself, it pulled every memory forward, one after another, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. The first memory that rose was Christmas, 2 years after Robert passed. I had gone all out, set the house with garlands, baked pies, even polished the silver Robert and I had received as a wedding gift 50 years earlier. I thought it would be a comfort to keep our traditions alive. To make Richard and Pamela feel like nothing had changed. But the night before Christmas Eve, Pamela called. Her voice was syrupy, but her words were sharp. Richard's been under so much stress at work. She said, we thought it would be better to keep Christmas small this year. Just us and the kids. You understand, right? Of course, I said yes. I spent that Christmas Eve alone. Heating leftovers, watching black and white movies on TV, pretending I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. It never did. Later, I found out through a neighbor's Facebook post that they'd hosted a big gathering at their house, friends, neighbors, even Richard's old college buddy. Everyone but me. The next memory was Jennifer's 16th birthday. I remember saving for months to buy her a necklace, something delicate. With a tiny sapphire stone. Her birthstone. I wanted her to have something lasting. Something that said, your grandmother believes in you. I showed up early to the party. Gift bag in hand, only to be told by Pamela at the door. Oh, Alice, didn't Richard tell you? We decided to keep it simple. Just her friends. Behind her, music pounded, and Jennifer's laughter rang out. I saw balloons, lights, a DJ. It wasn't small at all. I went home that night with the necklace still in my purse. Later, Jennifer texted me. Thanks for the necklace. Grandma, Mom gave it to me. It's pretty. Pamela had given it to her. As if it had been from her. Memory after memory unfolded. The Easter dinner where I sat at the far end of the table. Forgotten while Pamela led the prayer and Richard carved the ham. The family photo where I was asked to stand off to the side. Just for one shot, and that shot ended up being the one posted online. The recital where Jennifer waved to everyone in the front row and didn't even see me in the back. Because Pamela had told me the wrong start time. Each slight had seemed small at the time. Easy enough to explain away. Easy enough to forgive. But forgiveness only works when it's not a strategy. And now I saw it clearly. This wasn't a series of accidents. It was a pattern. A slow, deliberate erasure. I touched the pearls at my ears. Robert's gift to me. He'd told me once, you'll never fade, Alice, you're too strong for that. But what he hadn't known was that strength can be chipped away. Not with one big blow, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. I had been cut so many times, I stopped noticing the sting. Until tonight. Tonight, that name tag reopened every wound at once. The band switched to another upbeat song. Jennifer and her new husband danced. But her smile never reached her eyes. Pamela laughed loudly at a joke someone told. But her laughter sounded brittle. Richard clapped along. His face flushed, not from joy, but from humiliation. I didn't move, I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is louder than a scream. I thought back even further. To the days when Robert was alive. How different things were then. He had a way of grounding the family. People respected him. They listened when he spoke. They included me because they knew they couldn't exclude him. When Robert died, something shifted. At first, I thought it was grief. We were all stumbling, all trying to fill the space he'd left. But gradually, I realized, it wasn't grief. It was freedom. Freedom for Pamela to take the reins. Freedom for Richard to stop standing up for me. Freedom for them to turn me into the silent wallet in the corner. I remembered Robert's words during one of our last evenings together. He'd been tired, his breath shallow, but his eyes still sharp. "Alice," he whispered, "don't let them use you." At the time, I thought he meant money. I thought he was warning me about investments. About making sure the estate was handled properly. But now I knew he meant more. He meant my dignity, my place, my name. And tonight, standing at that podium, reading his words, I had taken that back. Yet even as I sat there, calm and composed, part of me ached. Because no mother dreams of being the one to humiliate her own child. Even when the truth demands it. No grandmother wants to see her granddaughter's wedding shadowed by shame. I wanted to remember this night for the music, the flowers, the vows, not for the codicil I'd read, not for the silence that followed. But sometimes life doesn't give you the version you wish for. Sometimes it gives you the version you need. And tonight, I needed the truth. A waiter came by again. "Can I take your plate, ma'am?" I nodded. My food was untouched. The chicken cold, the vegetables limp. He carried the plate away. And I was left with only my glass of water and the name tag beside it. I picked it up once more, turned it over in my hands. Then I slipped it into my purse. Not because I wanted to keep it as a reminder of humiliation, but because I wanted to remember the turning point. The moment I stopped being invisible. That night, I didn't cry. Not in the ballroom, not in the taxi home. Not even when I changed out of the lavender gown and hung it carefully in my closet. I didn't cry because I had already cried all my tears years ago. When I still thought things could change. Now I was past tears. Now, I was something else entirely. I was awake. The next morning, the house was too quiet. I woke early, as I always do. The dawn light spilling through the lace curtains in my bedroom. The lavender gown still hung in the corner. Pearls resting on the dresser. I hadn't had the energy to put them away. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. They looked like props from another life. Evidence of a night I couldn't quite believe had happened. The name tag lay on the nightstand. Its sharp words staring back at me. The old lady who's paying for everything. I should have thrown it away. But I didn't. Instead, I slipped it into the top drawer of my dresser, beside Robert's letters, not as a wound to reopen, but as a reminder of where I stopped being silent. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, and I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, with a touch of honey. The mug felt warm in my hands, steadying. I sat at the table Robert and I had bought 40 years ago. The chairs creaked the same way they always had. The house still smelled faintly of cedar, of the floor polish Robert used on weekends. It was strange, how a house can hold so much memory, yet feel so empty when the voices are gone. I had gotten used to it, or so I thought, but last night cracked open a silence inside me I hadn't wanted to face. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel lonely, I felt erased. The knock came mid-morning. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people in my neighborhood knew better than to drop by unannounced. When I opened the door, there stood Martin, the lawyer who had given me the envelope at the wedding. He looked the same as he had last night, steady, a little tired, but purposeful. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, holding his hat in his hands. "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He followed me into the kitchen. I poured him tea, and we sat across from each other at the old oak table. "I owe you an apology," he began. "Robert gave me that codicil years ago, and I should have delivered it sooner. He wanted me to wait until it was necessary. Last night, I realized I'd already waited too long." I shook my head. "You did what he asked. And in a way, I think last night was the right time." Martin studied me for a moment. "You handled it with grace, Alice. More grace than most people would have. Standing in your shoes." I smiled faintly. Grace is all I had left. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Finally, Martin leaned forward. "There's something else I need to tell you." I looked at him sharply. "Something Robert left?" "Not exactly," he said carefully. "Something I've heard. About Pamela. About Richard." My chest tightened. "Go on." Martin hesitated, then spoke. "There are whispers that Pamela and Richard have been considering selling your house. Quietly, behind your back." I froze. "My house?" I repeated. "Yes," Martin said softly. "From what I understand, Pamela's been talking to a realtor she knows. Nothing's been signed, but the intention is there." I gripped the edge of the table. "This house, the home Robert and I built, the walls where we raised our son, the garden we planted together, was the last piece of him I had. And they wanted to take it." "Why?" I whispered. Martin sighed. "Money. The wedding was expensive. Pamela's parents didn't contribute. They leaned on you for almost everything. And now, with the debts piling up, Pamela sees your home as an asset. Not a memory, not a sanctuary, just an asset." I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not anger, something deeper, something colder. It wasn't enough that I had paid for their life, their parties, their celebrations. Now they wanted the roof over my head. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the steam curling up from my tea. For years, I had convinced myself that Pamela was simply careless, thoughtless, maybe even insecure, that she didn't mean to wound me. Not really. But now, the pattern was undeniable. The exclusion. The mockery. The erasure. And now, theft. It wasn't clumsiness. It was calculation. Martin cleared his throat. "Alice, I know this is difficult to hear. But you need to be prepared. If they try to push you out, you need to know your rights. Robert protected you in his will. That protection extends to this house." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." But inside, something stirred. Because this wasn't just about legal rights anymore. This was about respect, about dignity, about standing in my own home without feeling like a guest in it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something sharp, something alive, like the edge of a blade pressed against stone. Resolve. Martin finished his tea and stood. "I'll check in again soon. In the meantime, keep that codicil safe. You may need it." I walked him to the door, thanked him, and watched as he disappeared down the street. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same as before. Because now I knew I wasn't entirely alone. Robert had thought ahead, Martin had honored his wishes, and somewhere inside me, a part of myself I thought had died was beginning to stir. That afternoon, I went to the garden. The roses Robert planted were just beginning to bloom, their petals unfolding under the spring sun. I knelt in the soil, pulling weeds, trimming stems, letting the dirt stain my hands. It felt grounding. Every snip of the shears was a reminder. I still had control over something. This was still my home. My garden. My life. And if Pamela thought she could strip it away as easily as she stripped away my title, my place, my name, she was wrong. Very wrong. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I wiped my hands on my apron and stood tall, the smell of roses clinging to me. For the first time since Robert died, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. Because if Pamela wanted a battle, she was about to discover that the old lady paying for everything was not as weak as she thought. I woke the next morning different. Something had shifted overnight. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was there, quiet as a current beneath the surface of a river, pulling everything in a new direction. For years, I had floated along, convincing myself that compliance was love, that silence was strength, that sacrifice was what mothers did. But after Martin's visit, after hearing Pamela's plan to sell my house, the house Robert and I built with our own hands, something in me refused to stay quiet. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight in the way Pamela expected. I was going to do something she never anticipated. I was going to push back. Silently, firmly, with the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience. That morning, I dressed with care. Not in the lavender gown from the wedding. Not in morning black, but in a navy skirt and a crisp white blouse. My pearl earrings again, simple, dignified. Then, I took the codicil from my dresser drawer, tucked it into my purse, and drove downtown to the bank. The teller greeted me politely, and within 20 minutes I was seated with the branch manager. "I'd like to move some of my accounts," I told him calmly. We went through everything: savings, investments, the trust Robert had set up. I shifted assets quietly, creating separate accounts under my sole authority, accounts Richard and Pamela knew nothing about. By the time I left, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't handing them everything. I was taking something back. That afternoon, Richard called. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "Pamela thinks you embarrassed us at the wedding. Why did you read that will in front of everyone?" I let the silence stretch before answering. "Because it needed to be read." He sighed heavily. "You could have ruined Jennifer's big day." Pamela had to calm her down for hours afterward. "Jennifer cried," I said softly, "because she saw the truth. And sometimes the truth hurts." "Mom." "I won't apologize, Richard," I interrupted, my voice steady, "and I won't be erased." Silence. Then he muttered, "Pamela says maybe it's time you think about downsizing. A retirement community, maybe, somewhere easier for you." There it was, the beginning of the move, the polite cover story for the theft Martin had warned me about. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'll think about it," I said. But I knew my answer already. That night, I pulled out Robert's letters. One in particular caught my eye. He had written it during his last hospital stay, in shaky handwriting but with his usual precision. "Alice, if you ever feel they are trying to push you aside, remember, you are not a burden. You are the root. Without you, the tree does not stand. Don't let anyone forget that." I traced the words with my fingers, as though touching him again. "I won't forget, Robert," I whispered. "Not anymore." The days that followed were quiet, but I began to notice everything with sharper eyes. Pamela dropped by, unexpectedly, one afternoon. Her voice honeyed as she asked if I'd considered selling the house. "It's so big for one person," she said sweetly, running her hand along the banister. "You must get so tired keeping it up. Wouldn't it be nice to have less responsibility?" I smiled politely. "I like the space. But imagine," she pressed, "a cozy apartment, all on one floor, no stairs, no garden to worry about." "I like my stairs," I replied, still smiling. "They keep me strong." She blinked, clearly thrown by my refusal to play along. Another time, she hinted at finances. "You know, Richard and I are thinking of investing in a new business venture. Very promising. If only we had a little more capital." "Then you should find investors," I said calmly, sipping my tea. Her smile faltered. "I thought, maybe you'd want to help." I shook my head gently. "I've already helped plenty. Now it's your turn to stand on your own." For the first time in years, Pamela had no words. She left quickly after that, her heels clicking hard against the tile. Each small refusal was like planting a seed. A quiet rebellion, not shouted, not dramatic, just steady. And each time I said no, I felt Robert standing beside me. One evening, as I worked in the garden, Jennifer appeared at the gate. Her eyes were red, mascara still smudged from crying. "Grandma," she whispered, "can I come in?" "Of course." She walked across the grass, hesitated, then threw her arms around me. I'm sorry, she said, for the name tag, for everything. I didn't know Mom planned that. I didn't know it would hurt you like that. I held her tightly, my chest aching. Oh, Jennifer. She pulled back, tears shining in her eyes. I don't want to be like her. I don't, but sometimes it feels like she controls everything. I cupped her face gently. You are not your mother. Remember that. She nodded, her shoulders shaking. I love you, Grandma. And in that moment, I knew the family wasn't entirely lost. There was still one thread of love left to hold onto. But Pamela noticed the shift. The next time she came by, her words were sharper, her eyes colder. You've changed, she said flatly. Have I? I replied, meeting her gaze. You used to be accommodating. I used to be blind, I said softly. Pamela's jaw tightened. She didn't reply. But I could see it in her face. She knew the old lady who always said yes was gone. And that terrified her. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass. For the first time in years, I felt not like a guest in my own home, but like its keeper. And as the sky turned gold, I whispered aloud, I'm still here, Robert, and I'm not going anywhere. The rebellion had begun. Not with fire. Not with rage. But with something far stronger. With resolve. It started small, as these things always do. A comment here, a suggestion there. Pamela no longer bothered to sweeten her words with honey. The mask was slipping. You really should think about your future, she said one afternoon, sitting stiffly on my couch with her arms crossed. It isn't fair to Jennifer and the kids if you insist on keeping this house. What happens if you fall? What happens if you get sick? I smiled gently. Then I'll call an ambulance. That's what phones are for. Her lips tightened. You're being unreasonable. No, Pamela, I said calmly, for the first time in years. I'm being very reasonable. Richard came next. He called late in the evening. His voice weary, rehearsed. Mom, Pamela's just worried. She thinks the house is too much for you. Is that what she thinks? Or is that what you think? Silence on the other end. Finally, he muttered, we're trying to look out for you. I almost laughed. No, Richard, you're trying to look out for yourselves. He bristled. That's not fair. Neither is calling your mother a walking bank account. I said quietly, but here we are. The line went silent again before he hung up. The pressure grew heavier in the following weeks. Pamela dropped by with glossy brochures of retirement communities, sliding them across my kitchen table as though they were gifts. Look at this one, she chirped. Indoor pool, daily activities, chef-prepared meals. You'd love it. I pushed the brochure back toward her. If you love it so much, Pamela, maybe you should move there. Her smile cracked. Another time, she brought a realtor with her, unannounced. This is Alice, Pamela said, her voice syrupy again. She's been thinking about selling. I've been doing no such thing. I interrupted, rising from my chair, and you can leave my property at once. The realtor, clearly embarrassed, gathered his papers and left quickly. Pamela stood frozen, fury flickering in her eyes. You're making a mistake, she hissed. No, Pamela, I said calmly, holding her gaze. The mistake was thinking I'd let you walk over me forever. But the hardest part wasn't Pamela. It was Richard. My son, my only child. One Saturday, he came by alone. His hair was grayer than I remembered. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I almost saw the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to run into my arms after little league games. Smelling of sweat and grass. Grinning with pride. Mom, he said, sitting across from me, why are you doing this? Why are you making everything so difficult? I stared at him, my heart breaking. Richard, I whispered, do you even hear yourself? I am not the one making this difficult. I raised you, I gave you everything I could. And now you sit here and talk to me like I'm an obstacle. His jaw tightened. Pamela just wants what's best. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer. Richard, I said softly, I am your mother, not your enemy, but every time you side with her, every time you ignore what you know is wrong, you are losing me, piece by piece. He looked down at his hands, ashamed, but said nothing. When he left, I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the street. My chest ached, but my resolve held. If even my son couldn't stand with me, then I would stand alone. The weeks wore on. Pamela's tactics became bolder, sharper. She began speaking for me at family gatherings, as though I weren't in the room. She doesn't really want to cook anymore, she told Jennifer one Sunday. That's why we'll be handling Thanksgiving this year. I cleared my throat. Actually, I do want to cook. And I will be hosting Thanksgiving. Just as I always have. Pamela's smile didn't falter, but her eyes burned. Later, she pulled me aside. Why must you contradict me in front of the children? Because you lied, I said simply. Her nails dug into her palm. You don't know what you're doing, Alice. Oh, I whispered, leaning closer. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm remembering who I am. And yet, even in the face of all her venom, moments of tenderness still broke through. Jennifer visited often now, slipping away from Pamela's watchful eyes. She helped me in the garden, carrying watering cans, pruning the roses. One afternoon, as we knelt side by side, she said quietly, Grandma, they talk about you like you're not even part of the family. But you are, to me, you always will be. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes. Thank you, Jennifer, I whispered, that's all I needed to hear. Her small rebellion gave me strength. If even one grandchild remembered me as more than a wallet, then perhaps all wasn't lost. Still, Pamela pressed on. She began hinting about my health in front of others. She's been forgetful lately, she'd say casually. It might be time to think about guardianship. She's fragile, she whispered to neighbors. She needs someone to manage things for her. At first, it stung, but then, it made me smile. Because I could see the fear behind her lies. Pamela had expected me to stay quiet, to roll over, to let her write the ending of my story. Instead, I was writing it myself. And she didn't know how to stop me. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun sank low, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet. I held Robert's letter in my lap, the one where he told me not to let them use me. I'm trying, Robert, I whispered into the twilight. I'm trying to honor what you asked. And in that moment, I felt it, not just resolve, not just defiance, but something deeper. Hope. Hope that the seeds I was planting, quiet resistance, subtle refusals, firm boundaries, would grow into something stronger than Pamela's schemes. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Pamela would not stop. Richard would not find his backbone overnight. There would be more battles ahead. And I would have to face them all, steady and silent, until the moment came for something greater. Because I was not the old lady paying for everything anymore. I was Alice Edwards. And I was done being erased. Autumn came quickly that year. The trees turned fire red and golden, their leaves falling in quiet spirals that carpeted my yard. I spent long afternoons raking, listening to the crunch beneath my feet, and thinking about what was to come. Pamela had not slowed her campaign. If anything, she grew bolder with each passing week. She dropped hints at church luncheons. Alice really should think about assisted living. At her age, it's the sensible choice. She whispered at family dinners. It isn't safe for her to be alone anymore. She planted seeds of doubt wherever she could. But what Pamela didn't realize was that I had started planting seeds too. Quiet ones, steady ones, and mine were beginning to take root. Thanksgiving arrived. For years, it had been my holiday, the one tradition Robert and I had kept alive no matter how busy life became. I roasted the turkey, mashed the potatoes, baked pies until the house smelled of cinnamon and apples. This year, Pamela tried to wrest it from me. She shouldn't be cooking all that food, she told Richard loudly. It's too much. I'll host. But Jennifer spoke up, her voice firm for the first time. Grandma always hosts Thanksgiving, that's how it's supposed to be. And just like that, the decision was made. Pamela sulked, but she couldn't argue without exposing her own pettiness. So the family came to my house. As they always had. I prepared everything with care. Not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted the house to remind them of what had been lost. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. Candles flickered on the mantel. The dining table gleamed under soft light, set with Robert's old china. When everyone arrived, I greeted them at the door with the same smile I'd worn for decades. But inside, I was different. This year, I wasn't just the host. I was the witness. Dinner began politely enough. Plates filled, glasses clinked. Jennifer helped me carry dishes, whispering, "It's perfect, Grandma." But Pamela couldn't help herself. Between bites of cranberry sauce, she said sweetly, "Alice, you must be exhausted after all this work. Don't you think it might be time to pass the torch?" I smiled. Exhausted? Not at all. Cooking keeps me strong. My doctor says I'm healthier than most women 10 years younger. Her smile faltered. Richard cleared his throat. "Mom, Pamela just means." "I know what she means," I interrupted gently, "and I'm telling you both, I am not done. Not with cooking, not with this house, not with life." Silence stretched across the table. Forks paused mid-air. I let it linger, then returned to my meal as though nothing had happened. Later, as the pie was served, Pamela tried again. "You know, we toured a lovely retirement community last week. They had activities every day, gardening, bingo, movie nights. Doesn't that sound nice, Alice?" I set down my fork and folded my hands. "Pamela, let me make something clear," I said softly. "I am not moving. This house is mine. Robert built it for me. And I intend to live here until I decide otherwise. Do you understand?" Her eyes narrowed. "You sound so sure." "I am," I replied. Jennifer squeezed my hand under the table. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the quiet house. The dishes were stacked, the table cleared, the candles burned low. And I thought about Robert. "Don't let them use you," he had written. I wasn't, not anymore. But resistance was no longer enough. Pamela was not going to stop. She would push until there was nothing left of me. So I had to do something more than resist. I had to plan. The next morning, I called Martin. "Can you come by?" I asked. When he arrived, I led him into Robert's old study, where the shelves still smelled faintly of leather and dust. "I need to make changes," I told him. He raised an eyebrow. "To the will?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Robert protected me, but now I must protect myself, and this house. I want it written so clearly that even Pamela can't twist it. The house goes to Jennifer. No one else. Not Richard, not Pamela, only Jennifer." Martin nodded slowly. "That's a bold move." "It's the right one," I said. "She's the only one who's shown me love without strings." He began to draft the documents. And as the pen scratched across the paper, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. A week later, Jennifer came by again. We sat together in the garden. The air cold but refreshing. "I need to tell you something," I said, taking her hand. "When the time comes, this house will be yours." Her eyes widened. "Grandma, I don't." "Hush," I said gently. "I'm not leaving yet, but I want you to know, you are the one I trust. Not because you're perfect, but because you still see me. Not as a wallet, not as a burden, as your grandmother." Tears filled her eyes. "I promise I'll take care of it. I'll take care of you." "I know," I whispered. Pamela noticed the shift. She sensed something had changed, though she couldn't put her finger on it. Her visits grew sharper, her tone more clipped. "You're making things difficult for everyone," she accused one evening. "No, Pamela," I said calmly. "I'm simply making things clear." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you planning?" I smiled. You'll see. In truth, I wasn't planning a grand revenge. I wasn't plotting to destroy her. All I wanted was simple: dignity, protection, a legacy for Jennifer. But the power of quiet planning is that it unsettles those who thrive on control. Pamela could feel the ground shifting, even if she couldn't see the cracks yet. And that fear was its own kind of victory. That night, as I stood at the window watching the first snowflakes fall, I whispered to Robert again. They think I'm weak, they think I'm alone, but you and I both know the truth. You left me the tools. And now I'm using them. The snow drifted silently through the air, covering the garden, the roof, the steps. It felt like a cleansing. Like a beginning. Pamela had her strategy. But now, so did I. And mine was written not in whispers, not in manipulations, but in ink, in law, in the unshakable foundation of this house. The house she would never take. Christmas came with all its glitter and noise. Strings of lights blinked in every window, carols poured from every store, and families gathered as though the year had been nothing but joy. For me, Christmas had always been Robert's favorite season. He strung the lights himself, humming off-key as he balanced on the ladder. He carved the turkey, wore the silly Santa hat Jennifer once gave him, and ended the night reading a Christmas carol aloud by the fire. Without him, the holiday had never been the same. But this year, it wasn't just his absence that weighed on me. It was Pamela's presence. She insisted on hosting Christmas Eve at her house. It's easier, she claimed, less work for Alice. I agreed quietly, though I knew it wasn't about me. It was about control. Pamela wanted the holiday under her roof, in her hands, on her terms. So I went, not because I wanted to, but because I knew the moment was coming. The moment when all the quiet pressure, all the whispered digs, all the schemes would finally snap. The house was beautiful, I'll give her that. A towering tree sparkled in the corner, ornaments catching the glow of the fireplace. The table was set with gold-trimmed plates. Every fork and knife aligned perfectly. Pamela had spared no expense, though I suspected much of it had come from my money. One way or another. Guests filled the rooms, neighbors, friends of Richard's, even some of Pamela's distant relatives I'd never met. They laughed, clinked glasses, and looked at me with that polite curiosity reserved for someone who doesn't quite belong. And then I saw it. By the door, a row of place cards neatly stacked, ready for guests to pick up before finding their seats. I walked closer, and my breath caught. There it was again. Not Alice, not Grandma, but the old lady who funds the party. Pamela hadn't learned, she hadn't even tried. She was doubling down. I didn't take the card. I left it there, face up, for all to see. I walked into the dining room, chin lifted, my heart pounding but steady. At the head of the table sat Pamela, glowing in her red dress. Richard at her side like a shadow. Jennifer sat further down, her eyes darting toward me nervously. Mother, Pamela said, her voice too sweet. So glad you could make it. Sit, sit. We saved you a seat right by the kitchen. Easy access to the dishes. I smiled faintly. How thoughtful. I sat where they placed me. But inside, I knew, tonight would not end the way Pamela expected. Dinner began. Toasts were made. Pamela praised the meal she prepared, though I suspected most of it had been catered. Richard smiled dutifully, clinking his glass at every cue. But then, as dessert was served, Pamela cleared her throat. Family, she began, her smile wide, her voice carrying, I have an announcement. The room hushed. She looked directly at me. Alice has finally agreed that it's time for her to move into a retirement community. It's the best decision, for her health, her safety, and for the family's peace of mind. Gasps rose around the table. Neighbors murmured, relatives nodded approvingly. I sat perfectly still. Pamela beamed, soaking in the approval. Of course, that means her lovely house will soon be on the market. Richard and I will handle the arrangements, of course. We'll make sure it goes to the right buyer. She lifted her glass, to Alice, for knowing when to let go. The room erupted in polite applause. But Jennifer's fork clattered to her plate. "Grandma, is that true?" Dozens of eyes turned to me. I set down my napkin and rose slowly from my chair. The chatter died. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. "No," I said softly, "it is not true." Pamela blinked. "Alice, don't be shy. We talked about this." "We did not," I interrupted, my voice steady. "What you have just said is a lie." Gasps rippled through the room. Pamela's smile faltered. "Now, Alice." I reached into my purse. Slowly, calmly, and pulled out the envelope Martin had given me weeks ago, updated. Notarized, signed. "This," I said, holding it up for all to see, "is the truth." I unfolded the document and began to read. "In the event of my passing," I read, my voice clear, "the property at 114 Westwood Drive shall pass directly to my granddaughter, Jennifer Edwards. This decision is final and binding. It cannot be contested." A stunned silence fell over the table. I lowered the paper, my eyes sweeping the room. "This house will never belong to Pamela. It will never belong to Richard. It will belong to Jennifer, the only one who has treated me with respect." Jennifer's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Pamela's face drained of color. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I folded the document neatly and returned it to the envelope. "You wanted to make an announcement, Pamela," I said softly. "So did I." The silence was absolute. Pamela's mask cracked then, rage flashing across her face, her composure splintering. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I already have." Her hands trembled. "You're ruining this family." "No," I said calmly, my gaze steady. "I'm saving what little of it remains." Jennifer stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to me, tears running freely, and wrapped her arms around me. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered. I held her tightly, the document still clutched in my hand. "I love you too, my darling." Around us, the room remained frozen. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Pamela sat rigid, her face twisted. Richard stared at the floor. And for the first time in years, I felt taller than all of them. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply placed the envelope on the table, beside Pamela's untouched dessert, and returned to my seat. The message was clear. The old lady who funded the party had disappeared. In her place stood Alice Edwards, widow, mother, grandmother, and woman who refused to be erased. That night, as I walked out of Pamela's house into the crisp winter air, Jennifer beside me, I looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, sharp against the darkness. And I whispered to Robert, "I did it, I protected what was ours." For the first time in years, my heart felt light. Because dignity, once reclaimed, can never again be taken away. The silence from that Christmas Eve lingered long after the last candle burned down and the last guest scurried away. Pamela had tried to salvage the night with forced laughter, but the room never recovered. People left early, whispering as they went, their glances darting between her stiff smile and the envelope lying on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for me. When I stepped outside into the cold night, Jennifer at my side, I felt lighter than I had in years. The snow crunched under our feet. The stars glimmered above us. And for the first time, I wasn't leaving a family gathering in silence and shame. I was leaving with my head high. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Richard didn't call. Pamela didn't come by. For the first time in decades, the constant tug at my bank account, my time, my dignity, stopped. At first, I thought it was a trick. That they were waiting, plotting their next move, but as the days turned into weeks, I realized something else. They weren't regrouping. They were retreating. Jennifer visited often. She brought me groceries, though I still insisted on doing my own shopping. She helped me shovel snow, though I reminded her I'd managed for 68 winters already. But I didn't scold her. I let her help, because unlike Pamela's help, Jennifer's came with no strings attached. One afternoon, as we drank cocoa by the fire, she said quietly, "Grandma, I think Mom is angry with me. She barely speaks to me since Christmas Eve." I touched her hand gently. "That's because you stood beside me. She doesn't forgive loyalty that isn't directed at her." Jennifer swallowed hard. "I don't care. I'd rather lose her approval than lose you." Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. Instead, I squeezed her hand. "You won't lose me, Jennifer. Not now. Not ever." Pamela, however, couldn't resist a final attempt. She called one evening, her voice clipped and icy. "You embarrassed me in my own home," she snapped. "Do you realize what you did? You humiliated Richard. You humiliated Jennifer. You humiliated me." I listened quietly, letting her words spill like acid across the line. When she finished, I said calmly, "No, Pamela, I didn't humiliate anyone. I revealed the truth. If the truth humiliates you, that's not my fault. That's yours." She inhaled sharply. "You're tearing this family apart." I almost laughed. This family was tearing itself apart long before I spoke. I just refused to be the quiet victim any longer. And then I hung up. Richard showed up 2 days later. Alone. He stood on my porch. His shoulders hunched against the cold. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to tuck into bed. The boy who once believed I could fix anything. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know what to say." I opened the door wider. "Then sit with me, Richard. We don't need words yet." We sat in the living room. The fire crackling, the silence heavy. Finally, he whispered, "Pamela says I should cut ties. That you're toxic. That you're trying to ruin us." I turned toward him, my voice steady. "Richard, I never wanted to ruin you. I wanted to protect you. And even now, I don't want to cut ties. But I won't let you, or her, erase me. That's the line, and I won't cross it." His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, shame. "I don't know how to fix this," he murmured. "You start," I said gently, "by remembering I am your mother, not your enemy." From that day on, Richard became quieter around Pamela. I saw it in the way he hesitated before echoing her sharp remarks. The way his eyes flickered when she made decisions without him. He wasn't ready to stand against her. Not fully, but a seed had been planted. The same seed that had grown in me after that name tag at the wedding. And like all seeds, it needed time. Meanwhile, I found something I hadn't expected: peace. For years, I'd bent myself into silence, trying to keep the family together, swallowing insult after insult. I thought I was protecting harmony. But harmony built on humiliation isn't harmony at all. It's surrender. Now, in my quiet house, I finally had real peace. I cooked because I wanted to. I tended the garden because it gave me joy. I read Robert's letters not with tears, but with gratitude. I had redefined my place, not as the family's financier, not as its doormat, not as the silent ghost in the corner. I was Alice Edwards, widow, mother, grandmother, a woman whose dignity was her own. Word spread in the community. Neighbors whispered about Pamela's scene at Christmas. Some were scandalized, some quietly applauded. A woman from church stopped me after service, squeezing my hand. "You're stronger than most of us would be," she said. I smiled. Strength isn't loud, it's just steady. As winter melted into spring, the house felt lighter, brighter. Jennifer's laughter filled the kitchen more often. Richard called, halting but more frequent. Pamela, though, kept her distance. And that was fine with me. Because I no longer needed her approval, her invitations, or her lies. I had taken back my name, my house, my place. And no matter what came next, no one could take that from me again. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The first blooms of the roses just beginning to show. The air smelled of earth and promise. I whispered to the sky. I did it, Robert. I stood my ground. And for the first time since he left, I didn't feel like I was whispering to the past. I felt like I was whispering to the future. Time has a way of revealing truths. Not immediately, not with fire and thunder, but slowly, like a tide pulling back to expose what was always beneath the surface. After Christmas, things were different, not loud, not obvious, but different. Pamela kept her distance. She stopped calling, stopped dropping by with her clipped smiles and her subtle demands. At first, I thought it was the calm before another storm, but weeks stretched into months. And I realized something. She wasn't regrouping. She was losing. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in small, steady ways. Richard called more often now. Short calls at first. Awkward. "How are you, Mom?" Followed by long silences. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between us. Not yet, but he was trying. One evening, he came by alone, without Pamela. He sat at the kitchen table where Robert used to sit. His hands restless, tapping against the wood. "I don't know what's happening anymore," he admitted. "Pamela's angry. At you. At me. At Jennifer. At everyone." I poured him coffee, set the cup in front of him. "That's because she's losing control," I said gently. He looked up at me, the boy in him flickering through the lines of the man. "Do you hate her?" I shook my head. "No. Hate is a chain. I've carried enough chains in my life. I pity her, but I won't let her rule me." He swallowed hard. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand up to her." "You will be," I said softly, "one day, because you'll see what it's costing you not to." Jennifer, meanwhile, grew closer to me than ever. She came every Sunday, sometimes with her husband, sometimes alone. We cooked together, planted roses, sorted through old photo albums. One afternoon, she lingered over a picture of Robert holding her as a baby. His smile wide, his eyes proud. "He would have been so disappointed in Mom," she whispered. I touched her shoulder. "He would have been proud of you. And that's what matters." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Grandma." "You won't," I said firmly. "This house, this family, this legacy, it's yours now. And no one can take it away." But the ripples spread further than I expected. At church, people who once avoided me out of discomfort now sought me out. They asked after my health, complimented my garden, even asked advice. One woman leaned in one Sunday and whispered, "We heard what you did at Christmas. You reminded us that we don't have to stay quiet just to keep the peace." I smiled faintly. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. Her eyes shone with tears. "Thank you." Pamela, of course, didn't fade quietly. She spread stories. She told anyone who would listen that I was unstable, that I was turning Jennifer against her, that I was clinging to the past. But whispers don't hold power when the truth is already out in the open. And the truth was simple. I had drawn a line. For the first time, I wasn't bending, apologizing, or retreating. I was standing. And that terrified her. Spring turned to summer. The roses bloomed in waves of red and white. Jennifer and I hosted a small family barbecue in the backyard. A few cousins came, neighbors too. Pamela and Richard were invited. But only Richard came. He hovered near the grill, talking more with the men than with me. But he stayed. That alone was progress. As the sun dipped low, he sat beside me on the porch steps. For a long time, we said nothing. Then he whispered, "Mom, I don't know how to fix what Pamela's broken." "You don't have to fix it all at once," I said gently. "Start small. Start with telling the truth. To yourself, to me, to her." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry. It wasn't everything, but it was a start." Months passed. Pamela's visits ceased altogether. Richard still drifted between us. Torn, but the space Pamela left gave him room to breathe. And me? I lived. Not in bitterness, not in regret, but in quiet strength. I cooked when I wanted to, traveled when I chose, tended my roses in the mornings, and read Robert's letters by the fire at night. For years, I had believed my life was tied to how others treated me. That their cruelty defined my worth. But I had been wrong. My worth was mine all along. Sometimes, in the evenings, I still thought about the name tags. The cruel little cards that started it all. The old lady who's paying for everything. The old lady who funds the party. I kept them, tucked away in a drawer beside Robert's letters. Not as wounds, but as reminders. Reminders of the line I finally drew. Reminders of the silence I finally broke. Reminders that even at 68, even after a lifetime of sacrifice, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. And so, the long shadow of those humiliations began to fade. Pamela's voice grew quieter. Richard's heart grew softer. Jennifer's love grew stronger. And I grew freer. One evening, as the sun set in shades of gold, I stood in the garden, the roses blooming around me. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Robert, I hope you see me now. I hope you know I finally listened." The wind rustled through the leaves, soft and steady. And in that moment, I knew, he did. Summer turned to autumn again. As it always does, the leaves blushed red, then gold, then fell one by one, covering the earth like a quilt. I sat on the porch, a shawl wrapped around my shoulders, a cup of tea warming my hands. The house behind me stood tall and steady, every brick carrying 50 years of my life. It was no longer just walls and windows. It was a witness. It had seen Robert's laughter, Jennifer's childhood summers, my tears in the dark, and my quiet triumphs. It had seen me disappear. And it had seen me return. The battles had left their mark. Pamela no longer spoke to me. Richard came by sometimes, fumbling, searching for words he couldn't yet say. Jennifer came often, her visits filled with warmth and light. The family wasn't what it once had been. Perhaps it never would be again. But I had stopped mourning the version of life I thought I deserved. Because what I had now was something different. Something deeper. Not obedience. Not approval. But respect, mine, for myself. And that was enough. One afternoon, I found Jennifer in the garden, kneeling by the roses. She had dirt on her hands, a smudge across her cheek, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. "These are beautiful, Grandma," she said softly. "I want to keep them alive forever." I smiled. That's the thing about roses, Jennifer. They don't live forever. They bloom, they fade, they return. The beauty isn't in keeping them alive forever. It's in tending to them, season after season, with love. She looked at me, her eyes bright, like you did, with this family. My throat tightened. Yes, exactly like that. That night, I sat by the fire. Robert's letters spread across my lap. I read them again, slowly, letting his words echo through the room. "Don't let them use you. You are not a burden. You are the root." For so long, I had thought those words were instructions, commands to follow. Now, I realized they were reminders. Reminders of who I had always been, even when I forgot. As the fire crackled, I whispered into the stillness. "I did it, Robert. I found myself again. I stood up. I kept the house, the garden, the dignity. I'm not the old lady who pays for everything. I'm Alice, and I am enough." For a moment, the flames flared, sparks lifting into the chimney. And I felt him there. Not in the way I once begged for. Not in flesh or voice. But in presence. And that was enough too. The circle had closed. I had been erased, and I had written myself back in. I had been silenced, and I had found my voice again. I had been treated like a wallet, and I had remembered I was a woman. Not perfect, not invincible, but unbroken. Jennifer walked me home one evening after church, arm linked with mine. The air was crisp, the sky painted with stars. "Grandma," she said softly, "what if they never change? What if Mom never apologizes? What if things stay broken?" I squeezed her hand. "Then they stay broken, and we build something new with what's left. Not every family is whole, Jennifer, but dignity doesn't need everyone's approval. Sometimes it only needs one person to see you clearly. And I have you." Tears glimmered in her eyes. Always. And in that moment, I knew the legacy was safe. Not just the house, not just the roses, but the story. The story of a woman who refused to be erased. The seasons turned again. Winter came, snow softening the world into silence. I lit candles, cooked small meals, wrote in journals. I lived quietly, but not invisibly. Neighbors waved, church friends lingered longer. Jennifer visited, laughing in the kitchen, her joy filling the house with a sound I thought I'd lost forever. I wasn't lonely anymore, not because everyone had returned, but because I had returned to myself. And so, as the fire burned low one last evening, I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and whispered the truth aloud. Not to Robert, not to Jennifer, not even to Pamela or Richard, but to myself. Respect is not a gift. It's not a favor, it's the minimum, and I will never accept less again. The flames flickered, steady and strong. And so was I.